This is the new 2025 Ford Maverick LOBO, a purpose-built performance street truck from Ford built on the ever-popular Maverick compact pickup truck platform. And the cool part is it incorporates unique components from the 4th generation Ford Focus ST, which we never received here in the United States, but is sold overseas in places like Europe, making this a very unique pickup truck in the Ford Maverick lineup. This compelling street truck starts at just $35,930. So now we know that this is a sport truck, but what on earth is a Lobo? Well, that's a great question. Lobo is Spanish for wolf, and its origins with Ford actually go back to the Mexico market. It's something that Ford's been doing in Mexico for a while now, specifically with the Ford F-150. Now, the Ford F-150 is popular as a work truck in Mexico, but they weren't selling a whole lot of the higher trimmed Ford trucks to regular consumers. And so in an effort to try and distinguish those higher trims from the work trucks, they introduced them as the Ford Lobo, and so that's what they were sold as, and you could sometimes see them here in the southwest of the United States as they would occasionally drive over the border, and so you would kind of see them around, but they were never offered for sale as a Lobo here in the United States, at least until now. Now, personally, because this is a small compact pickup, I would have loved to see this thing called the Ranchero, but that's just my personal opinion. Getting into the Lobo specifically, obviously new for 2025 is the Ford Maverick Lobo, but that's not the only Lobo here in the United States. Ford's also introducing a new Ford F-150 trim, also called the Lobo, that features similar cosmetic styling options as with the Maverick behind me, obviously as a Ford F-150 trim. That's pretty cool in my opinion. The other cool part, specifically with the 2025 Ford Maverick Lobo, is that it's also introduced alongside the new for 2025 facelift for the Ford Maverick, which means anytime you see a Lobo specifically, it'll have the 2025 facelift. Anytime somebody hears the words performance, the first thing they say is, pop the hood. But in this case, the actual engine is something that's already offered in the current Ford Maverick lineup. The main changes are the rest of the drivetrain that have all been upgraded and changed, and with parts that are really not available in any other Ford Mavericks. Now, what we have here is only one option for the Lobo. You don't get the hybrid. Instead, all you have here is the EcoBoost turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder, which Ford rates for 250 horsepower and 277 pound-feet of torque. Now, it gets interesting with all that's connected to that, because after that is the quickshift 7-speed automatic transmission, which is borrowed from that European Ford Focus ST, and the Ford Maverick Lobo is all-wheel drive. So you can see some of the same sort of transmission mount setups here in the truck, which is kind of a cool feature. But that's not all, because in the back now is a twin-clutch rear drive unit that is actually borrowed from the Ford Bronco Sport. And what that does is it applies torque vectoring to the rear wheels, which helps to counter things like understeer in high-performance driving on track or at an autocross event, which is all great. But that's not the only performance upgrade. If you've looked at a Maverick before, you're probably familiar with the 4K tow package, and that is actually standard here on the Lobo, but not because they want to make it more premium or give you the option to tow. Instead, they want it because it comes with a larger radiator and fan and even an oil cooler, because on track, that's a very high-stress environment for engines, and so it's more important to keep it cool, and that 4K tow package will do exactly that. Just like the high-stress towing environment, on track is the same thing. Now, in terms of overall performance, obviously you can't expect a whole lot because the power figures and the engine are kind of unchanged from the standard Mavericks. And from what I've seen from other third-party testing, I saw some folks, by hard launching the Ford Maverick, they found that they could get it into the low 6-second range with 0 to 60, while some folks say it's similar or on par to other Maverick trims in the high 6-second range. The interesting part is with the quickshift 7-speed automatic transmission, it now has paddle shifters, so you can control the gears yourself, which is obviously more ideal for performance driving, but also the way the gearing is done itself inside the transmission to make it more suitable for having longer gears in certain areas to make it more better for autocross or even track driving. Now, the next thing we also have to talk about is, of course, fuel economy, which is still fantastic here on the Lobo. It has an EPA-rated 21 miles per gallon city, 30 miles per gallon highway, and 24 miles per gallon combined. And given that it has a 16.5 gallon fuel tank, that means in theory, if you get the best fuel economy you can get upwards of 500 miles on a single tank of gas. But obviously that's mostly highway driving on a flat or maybe even slightly downhill road. So not necessarily to be expected. But here's what I will say. So far in my time driving this truck, my average has been well above what they say the city driving is. And that's with a variety of mixed driving in Phoenix, Arizona, and even even driving it up here to beautiful Flagstaff, Arizona. So the fuel economy, fantastic, even while driving it very aggressively like a sport truck. So now let's talk about the exterior and underneath. But first, I just want to say that the Ford Maverick LOBO is so cool to look at. And I don't even need my opinion to know that, because this thing has had so many people come up to me asking questions or complimenting the truck, or even had some people walk up and were surprised to see a LOBO badge on a truck with a US plate. So it's certainly a conversation starter if nothing else, and certainly has the proper looks, which is kind of a requirement as a street truck. Now, starting here in the front of the vehicle, I want to point out that this particular example is finished in Oxford white, and the Ford Maverick LOBO is offered in just 4 colors, and they're pretty simple, but they're all pretty good looking colors. You have Oxford white, and you also have black, you have blue, and then gray, and that's it. But regardless of which color you actually choose, they all come with the black roof, which is kind of a signature LOBO thing that I think adds a nice bit of flair and matches some of the other items that we'll see on the exterior of the vehicle. Starting here in the front, the other thing I want to point out, as I mentioned earlier, is the facelift. For 2025, the Ford Maverick received a facelift here up front that changed things, like especially the headlights, and it just so happened that the LOBO, also new for 2025, they happen to coincide at the same time, and so all of the LOBOs will have the new facelift for the Ford Maverick. You also get this slick black grille here in the front, again matching our roof, but you also get the Ford black badge, not to be confused with Rolls-Royce. This is kind of a cool badge that on the Oxford white version actually looks pretty cool, because it gives a whole stormtrooper theme to the entire truck, but it's going to look the exact same also if you purchase a blue truck or gray truck, and it's something we've seen before on more specialty type Ford models, and it does make it feel more special here as well. As far as the actual lighting package, these are LED lights that do have built-in daytime running lights, which is a pretty cool flair for the update. You also have fog lights, and as you can see, everything here is also, of course, painted body color, which is always a nice sort of more luxurious premium touch that you need for the street touch aesthetics. Now, once you come to the actual side of the vehicle, the first thing I want to note is that this truck has a different stance, and that's because Ford's been playing with the things underneath this truck. Not only does the LOBO feature new tuned, stiffer suspension underneath, but it actually sits 1/2 inch lower here in the front and 1.1 inches lower in the back, resulting in a 0.8 inch lower roofline when compared to a standard equivalent Maverick model. They also retuned the steering as well to result in an overall more sporty driving experience, which again just kind of helps with the aesthetics and overall styling of the LOBO model. The other thing I want to talk about is right here, perhaps one of the coolest features for the LOBO, and that is these awesome wheels. These are 19 inches in diameter, and the super cool turbofan wheels really set it off for me. I think this is really where the compliments come from. When people say, wow, that's a cool truck, they really mean, I love the wheels on your truck. The shame is, as cool as these wheels are, is they hide one of the very, very important upgrades of the Ford Maverick LOBO, and that is behind the front wheels here are actually the front brakes, which are bigger as compared to the standard Maverick from the European Ford Focus ST, which anybody can tell you anytime you're doing any sort of performance or track driving, one of the most important upgrades you can actually do is brakes, and so we have that here as well. It's a great touch. As we move further back, we also have this, a specific LOBO badge. Not always do you see trim tags, or they're usually not that interesting, but here on the Maverick, the LOBO does actually get its own logo, which is pretty cool. Furthermore, we have some paint matched lower panels here, all paint matched power mirrors that also have integrated cameras and even a blind spot monitoring system. As you take a closer look at our black roof, you can also see it does in fact actually have a sunroof baked into it, which is kind of a nice luxurious thing. Not the most performance oriented item as you add a little bit of weight up top, but not really a big deal. You do have, of course, 4 doors, as is the only body style for the Ford Maverick, which is a very awesome packaging as far as the overall passenger capacity, as I'll show you on the interior. But then also, the LOBO comes with the actual power lock features that you can use here for the keyless entry, which is not something standard on the Maverick, but you'll find it here, making it just a little bit more practical and easier to use, a little bit more luxurious. As we come to the back, you can find a similar setup for the wheels and tires, which, interestingly, I have a weird time coming to the fact that these are wrapped with Goodyear Wrangler Territory tires. It seems like an odd choice for a street truck, but then again, that's something that you could easily change yourself if you wanted something more performance-oriented or for the track, whatever the case is. Next, of course, we have the bed, which you can see has these wonderful plastic side rails to help protect the paint on the bed from getting chipped anytime you need to use it. But this is obviously a very cool utilitarian fact, given and the whole build. I really like the idea that this could be a Ranchero because, of course, the actual bed feature and the fact that it's a little bit lower, kind of like a car. You also have the option for the spray and bed liner and all sorts of Ford accessories, including the outlets back here and all sorts of tie downs and bottle openers and cool accessories that, you know, you really want in a truck. You also have an electric rear window. Not something you necessarily expect to see in a compact truck, but it's a pretty nice luxurious feature nonetheless, so you can kind of open it up a little bit more if you want to get more airflow through the cabin. Now next, I also want to show you the back. The back has some cool stuff too. You're going to see more of those paint body color match features, including the lower bumper here. And again, that's something that just makes the truck feel a little bit more premium and greatly helps the aesthetics, which is one of the key factors that makes a street truck is the overall cosmetics, in addition to another Ford black badge with cameras both front and rear. And then you also have the tow hitch, which is part of our 4K tow package, although the Lobo is not necessarily intended for towing, but I suppose you could use it if you really wanted to. That's just not necessarily what it's built for. So next I'd like to show you the interior of the Ford Maverick Lobo, and it has a lot of Lobo exclusive items. Obviously the first thing that you see here is the seats, and these are a very cool item to help it stand out from the other Mavericks in the lineup. For example, we have Lobo embossed here in the actual seat, which is a nice touch, and then you also have the grabber blue and lime green stitching, which has a nice contrast to the rest of the interior. Even these center inserts that you see here, sort of a textured with blue splotched in it theme, is all actually specific for the Lobo itself. And the cool part is you can also find that stitching here in the steering wheel and then also here in the center console. But that's not all. The Maverick, which has a pretty cool interior as a whole, I'd say, especially for the vehicle at this price point, also has a mix of blues and grays and other things that all kind of work together in a very unique fashion to give you a very fun interior, especially for the price. Ford just calls this black onyx, but I think that's kind of understating how cool the interior actually is. Now, getting into some of the specific details, I do want to talk about the seats for a moment. What's interesting here is that the driver's seat is the only power adjustable seat. The passenger is actually going to be manually adjustable. And another interesting feature is while they do look like they have some side bolstering, I'll tell you right now that that is not enough side bolstering from driving this thing to actually want to use it in anger on track or at an autocross course. Now, the benefit of how it's set up currently is that if you wanted to daily drive your Lobo, which I imagine most folks will, then this is not so aggressive that it becomes unpleasant to use. It's still going to be easy to get in and out of, and it's still going to be comfortable on long road trips. And so I can understand where the value in this particular setup actually comes from for the average consumer or Maverick buyer. As we get into some of the details, here is the door card. It's a very practical door card, and you can see on this particular one, we also have the optional B&O sound system. It's an 8-speaker system that does include a subwoofer, and it's a great option. It sounds fantastic here, and I would definitely recommend it. You also have a door pocket here with a nice bottle holder. You actually have your 4 power windows with one touch for the driver, power adjustable mirrors here, and then of course your central locking system. Once you move inside, you could argue this is sort of a fun Easter egg to have the built Ford Tough there on the side of the door jamb. Here is also going to be your main lighting controls for also your headlights, your gauge dimming, and then of course your bed lights. And then let's go ahead and climb in, and I can show you the rest of what we have going on here. So keyless start here, push the button down below, and you can see all the startup animations here for our Lobo. It's the standard Lobo stuff, or standard Maverick stuff, I should say. So in terms of the way that everything actually goes and starts on. Now, first I want to start with the steering wheel, which of course is very cool because of all the extra stitching. It feels good in the hands. It has all sorts of buttons and control functionality on it, similar to the other Mavericks. Over here on the left side, you'll see of course some of your driver assist, which includes the lane keep assist and even the cruise control with all of its various settings, volume adjustments. But then over here, we have a lot of exciting buttons here. Obviously, this is going to be how you actually adjust the main gauge display right in front of the driver. You can thumb through some of your different options and controls that are actually available to select whatever it is that you might want to look at. So I think that's nice that you can kind of customize that main display a bit. But more importantly, it's also where your drive modes are. So, for example, obviously it starts in normal, but you also have a slippery mode, and it has a little description below telling you what each mode does. Eco is pretty self-explanatory, normal, and then sport. It says spirited on-road driving. And I want to pause for a moment here to talk about sport specifically. Is going to be the one that when you want to have the truck feel a bit more responsive, change the throttle inputs, and give you more out of the truck, you know, be a little bit more zippy, that is absolutely the one you use. It's not the only performance driving mode on this truck, because this truck also has the exclusive Lobo mode. And notice it says spirited closed course driving, track use only. Most of that is because specifically it also disables some of your traction control, but the reason that the sport mode I'd say is better for a street mode as compared to the Lobo mode is the fact that the sport mode will still use your higher gears when you go into things like the freeway, and it doesn't become so aggressive that it becomes hard to be smooth in regular traffic driving, whereas the Lobo mode is in fact a full track mode that is trying to squeeze every ounce of performance out of the truck, and therefore it's not really suitable for regular street use. It's more so the autocross or the track day stuff, and it's really going to rev up the vehicle, take full use of things like that twin clutch rear drive unit just to get the maximum amount of performance, and that is something that will not be fun for regular street usage. But it is a cool feature nonetheless that this truck comes with its exclusive Lobo mode, certainly something that is very much different from the other trucks in the Maverick lineup. With that, let's continue on to the fact that this also has paddle shifters in the steering wheel. That is a very unique feature not found in other Maverick models, and obviously this is something that would have been taken directly from the Ford Focus ST. The benefit of that being that you can control the shifts yourself, use that in conjunction with the actual Maverick mode, or you can actually shift them yourself using the manual mode, which we'll talk about more in a sec. The shifts themselves are actually kind of quick. You'd be surprised at how quickly they shift through some of the gears. They feel fairly responsive. There's just not a whole lot of physical feedback. Additionally, you have your turn signal indicator for the stock over here. The steering column itself is manually adjustable, and then you have your wiper stock over here on the right side. Coming to the middle of the vehicle, you have a massive display here, especially for an entry-level vehicle. Most vehicles on the cheaper side tend to have smaller infotainment systems, but that's not the case here. And this seems like a fantastic size personally. It doesn't feel too big, but I also like the functionality of everything that's been baked into it, and you still have some fun details like the actual cubby behind it. Getting into the display itself, fairly sizable. It includes things like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, of course, the essentials, smartphone integration, Sirius XM radio, but then it has a variety of other functionality as well. Nothing that's necessarily exclusive to the Lobo, for example, but it's just a great Ford system found in a lot of the various Mavericks. Obviously, you have navigation, phone connectivity. You also have a variety of cool features as well that help with driving the truck. You have a record feedback, which actually sends the feedback to Ford, towing assistance, driving assistance, etc. As far as your climate controls go, they're actually all baked here into the bottom system, and so they're always visible, as you can see, regardless of what menu you're actually currently hovering over. But this is how you're going to get to things like your heated seats, which are here in the Lobo. You also have the heated steering wheel, which is a cool luxury feature, and then you also have your actual fan speed controls and all that. Now, this is not necessarily the easiest type of system to use while driving. It does give you the dual zone climate control layout for separate adjustments for the driver and passenger side, but it's a system that works just fine, and I have a feeling that with like most vehicles, once you get it set up into your particular likings, you're really not going to mess with it a whole lot outside of its current settings. Below that, you have your center vents, you have your trailer controls, you have some physical buttons here for things like the brake hold, the max heating, hazards, and then a physical button for the camera system, which is a nice touch. So if you're parking in someplace narrow, whatever the case is, you can pull that up and that'll show you what's actually surrounding the vehicle just by a quick touch of the button. But furthermore, I also want to talk about the cool camera functionality. You have cameras on the mirrors, on the front, and the rear of the Ford Maverick Lobo. And the cool part is some of those get activated automatically. You don't have to always use this button. When your parking sensors detect that you're getting close to something in the front, the truck will actually automatically pull up the front cameras right here on the center display for you, which I think is a fantastic detail, so you can park exactly as close or as far away as you want to from any particular item, and that's just a really good, I think, attention to detail, quality of life feature. Over here you of course have your skip buttons in addition to your volume and power controls. Below that, of course, the engine start stop. This is actually the controller here for sliding the rear power window. Then you also have your power USB chargers, a wireless charger, a nice bit of storage here in addition to the cup holders and other storage pockets. Then you have, of course, a rotary dial shifter. I know this isn't everybody's favorite, but it works just fine. You can simply put the vehicle into drive. When you put the vehicle into reverse, that pulls up the backup cameras, which of course have the predictive steering, which is a fantastic feature. And then of course you can put it back into park, or even use the manual mode here in the center of the vehicle and use those paddle shifters. You have an electronic parking brake here. You also have your traction control buttons, your auto start stop off button, and then this is an interesting one. This is essentially like a card holder. So if you had a key card that you needed to either access a gate, a garage, or maybe even a toll pass card, a credit card, driver's license, whatever the case is, that's all this is. It's an interesting feature that you really don't see in other vehicles, but it's in here in the Maverick LOBO. And then behind that, of course, you have this nice little storage cubby, and then up high, you actually have some pretty nice sun visors that also have integrated lights into the mirrors, which is a nice feature, especially for the price. You have some holders here to hold paperwork or more cards, etc., whatever the case is. Your actual sunroof controls are actually going to be found here in addition to your lights, so you can see all that and open that up. And then same thing here for the driver's side, and then of course your rear view mirror. All that's pretty straightforward here on the Ford Maverick. It's cool that they gave you so many unique features for the LOBO, but it still has all the excellent benefits of what was already a good interior from the get-go with the Ford Maverick. But let's check out the back. Moving into the back, you can see the door cards for the back seat actually have a very similar treatment in terms of the overall design, same door pulls here, and then you also have the same storage pockets and even water bottle holders, which is always great to see. But also, they carried over the actual seats here in the back. You have the same grabber blue and lime green accents, along with the same unique center insert pattern on these seats in the back. So that's a pretty cool thing. And you can see you can sit 3 wide here, so that's a total of 5 here in the Ford Maverick LOBO. You get some nice pockets on the back here, and then they also get some chargers here in the back with the option to actually fold this piece here down if you only have 2 people in the back for additional cup holders. Now, in terms of packaging, we have to get in here. You also see the additional light and the nice door handholds if you're doing some sporty driving with a full vehicle. But specifically, I want to point out at 6 foot even, I fit in this very, very comfortably. In fact, I think I fit back in the Maverick here better than I do in any mid-size pickup truck. The packaging on this thing is insane. My knees are close, but not touching the back. And you can see my head, of course, has some extra space thanks to this little bulge here, because you do lose some of the total roof room right here because of that sunroof. So those are some things to keep in mind. But the actual packaging for the back means that you can carry adults back here. And that means just the practicality of this thing is insane, which also doubles, of course, as additional indoor luggage storage, if you will, and if you don't want to put anything outside in the bed. All right, let's go ahead and put it in sport mode, and then let's talk about what it's like to drive the Ford Maverick LOBO. Now, I can tell you immediately, one of the first things you notice is that the truck is considerably stiffer than a lot of its counterparts, and obviously that comes from the sport tuned suspension. Now, as far as the steering, it feels good, but I'm not sure I can necessarily remember or differentiate it a whole lot from the actual main Maverick line, but Ford says they've reworked it, so it's probably safe to assume that they have, in fact, reworked it. Now, currently, I'm in the regular sport driving mode, which is a lot of fun. And as I mentioned earlier, this really is the one to use on the street. Sometimes people think that you can drive in the track modes, and the LOBO mode, while technically sure you could drive it on the street, I'm going to tell you right now that the way it shifts and stuff really isn't ideal for city driving. Even spirited city driving is not necessarily best suited in that case. It really is trying to be a all-out track mode for this vehicle. So that's, of course, what it's best suited to, and of course things like autocross and whatnot. Now, in terms of the other aspects of the truck, everything's quite comfortable. I mean, it's a Ford Maverick. It's a really, really popular vehicle, and those people haven't gotten their hands on the LOBO yet, but they're popular for a reason. The interior is comfortable, the visibility is fantastic, the A-pillars feel surprisingly narrow as far as visibility is concerned for something like this. The brakes are really, really sharp. You can brake really well and very, very hard. Some would say on par with some pretty serious performing sports cars out there. And obviously you hope that with the addition of them being specifically the ST brakes, that hopefully helps with things like heat endurance, especially more important than the brakes themselves. As far as the overall creature comforts, the optional sound system is actually really good from a general use case, so I highly recommend that. The transmission itself honestly feels very similar to the 8-speed. There's no characteristics aside from the ability to actually use these paddle shifters, which you heard there, kind of drop down into gear and then run through it. But at the same time, they're not lightning quick paddle shifters. It's a quick shift gearbox, but it's not necessarily a hardcore dual clutch where the second you tap the paddle, it just instantly has switched gears. It's a little bit slow, but it is honestly still pretty quick as far as the overall gear shifting. So I'd say I'm still pretty impressed with the shift times, especially for a performance vehicle at this price point. As for the torque vectoring and stuff, that's not so much something that you would really ever notice in regular driving for the vehicle, even on fun twisty roads, and more so the extreme benefits of that are at the limit on track, so you can kind of see the recurring themes here. Now, from the inside, the only kind of real Lobo specifics that you can see while driving, of course, is the stitching on the steering wheel, and then also the fact that you have the Lobo drive mode available to you, which again is supposed to be for track use. So from that perspective, it feels just like any other Maverick as far as the actual driving point of view. But the minute you see your other seats in the vehicle, you get in, you see the exterior, it has all of that look back factor that you love to see. It's also very nice. I find itself, even on the freeway, while it is a bit stiffer, it's not so stiff that it's now uncomfortable as a daily driver. It's definitely not going to beat you up or anything as you drive it around, and it's still really comfortable if you wanted to take road trips, for example, in your Lobo, and that's just a lot of the many things that I like about this vehicle. The fuel economy mixed in with these sporty characteristics, and it does feel like there are noticeable changes for both the Lobo and Sport mode in terms of the pedal's actual responsiveness and what's available in the vehicle. So I quite like this thing. I think this is a really solid offering. It feels like a really special vehicle from Ford themselves, and I'm quite happy that it exists, especially seeing it now sold in the US. If anything, I would say my biggest complaint would of course be that I would have liked to see it called the Ranchero, but I suppose that Ford probably, from a marketing perspective, presumes that they have more brand already or a bigger image or recognition with the Lobo brand than they do with specifically, let's say, Ranchero, which of course by this point is actually quite the old nameplate. So that's all kind of interesting to think about. But I quite like this truck. I will say this in terms of overall pricing, if you're looking at one of these, I mentioned this and you can check for yourself on Ford's website. Pricing starts at $35,930, which in itself is fantastic if you could buy one exactly at that. But that price excludes things like, of course, transportation, tax, title, any potential dock fees that you pay, and if you go for the optional equipment that's available on this to get the better sound system, or I think even the sunroof itself might be optional, I'd have to double check on that, but some of those items obviously cost extra, and by the time you do all that, you're getting more so to what this truck is, which has a sticker more so of around $43,000 once all said and done. And so you can see the price can change kind of dramatically there, and of course kind of changes the value proposition. Now, do I still think this is an awesome truck? Yes. I'm not sure they will sell a ton of them. I don't think these are going to be a common sight by any stretch of the imagination, but to the people that do go out and buy these, props to you. You're going to get yourself an awesome truck that is also a conversation starter, it's fun to drive, and it's really unique. Obviously, a lot of the drivetrain changes, there are a lot of real important changes to this truck that aren't just things like slightly tweaking stuff that you find on other special trim models of other certain vehicles. This is a real special edition that really does feel different from the standard Maverick offerings, and I'm excited to see what happens with these. I know, for example, on the aftermarket side, we're going to talk about some warranty voiding information at the moment. I know that some people that like to tune and play with these, obviously being a modern turbocharged engine, there's usually a lot of potential on the table to make some extra power. A lot of people like to tune them, and I think I saw at one point that people were tuning their Mavericks with this same motor, the 2-liter EcoBoost, to make anywhere from 300 to 350 horsepower with minimal, of course, mods and, basic tunes. Now, again, that voids your warranty, but it's interesting to think about what the potential for this truck is. You could add some of this, I suppose, onto a regular Maverick to try and build your own Lobo, but things like the transmission and that twin clutch rear drive unit are obviously a little bit more special, and in things like having the Ford ST brakes, a lot of that you could argue you see where the price increases are, not to mention the fact that inside, in terms of the actual amenities in the Lobo, are things that come from a higher trim Maverick anyways. It's not like it's a base truck with performance features, it is a higher trim Maverick that happens to have some extra performance mods, and so everything feels, I would say, on par for that. It's just kind of a shame that it feels like modern vehicles as a whole have gotten so expensive, and obviously this is kind of a result of that. But the Maverick specifically is popular for a reason, and I have a feeling that the Lobo is going to be regarded as a very special vehicle, and obviously has some collectability to it. Not that that's why you should buy a vehicle like this, but I think it is fun in all the right ways and checks the boxes that Ford was going for when they set out to build it. So there you have it. I really like the Ford Maverick Lobo. This is something that I've been telling myself that if I wanted a fun daily driver, this is a really compelling option. I just purchased one, but if I had it, this is something that I think would be in the running for me, because it's so practical, obviously being a pickup truck, but also having 4 doors with space to fit real adults in the back, which is awesome, and obviously carry cargo and stuff too. But then also being fun to drive from the enthusiast perspective is great. I know the automatic's not for everybody. Some people would have rather seen a manual, but your options were basically the 8-speed only, which is the standard automatic, or the quick shift from the Focus ST, which I think is kind of a cool addition and a cool thing to talk about when you're at the car shows anyways. With that, that's the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed it and could leave me a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it. Consider getting subscribed for more content like this in the future. And of course, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.